Hey guys, Foxit here and welcome back to another brand new and fantastic video, and today I'm going to be starting a little mini-series called How to Build a Gaming PC. And for the purposes of this series, I'm going to assume that you know absolutely nothing about computers or know barely a little bit about computers. And today what we're going to be talking about is how to upgrade your graphics card. Now for the purpose of a gaming enthusiast, the one thing you look at when you see a gameplay trailer for a new game or see gameplay for a new game is you always see the first thing you notice is the graphics. You don't notice the sound quality, or you don't notice the storyline, or you don't notice the plot. No, the very first thing you look at is an image of gameplay. And that's the one thing that really draws in players into a game. It's the graphics. And so upgrading your graphics card can be one of the most important upgrades, if not the most important upgrade of your entire PC. With that being said, I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to upgrade your gaming graphics card. I'm going to be explaining how to shop for a graphics card, explain the compatibility between the graphics card and the other components, and show you literally how to install a graphics card. I'm using my rig as a tutorial, and I'm going to be replacing an old graphics card that died out on me and be replacing it with a new one. So with that being said, let's get ready for the video. When shopping for a graphics card for a gaming PC, there's usually a sweet spot in which there's a certain amount of money you want to spend on a graphics card. And that sweet spot is usually around $200 or $250 to $400. The reason why you don't want to spend less than $250 is that there's a point less than $250 in which you're going to be not paying enough for the frames that you want. It's pretty much common sense. You pay less, you get less frame rates. And that's kind of common sense right there. And if you pay above $400, there's a certain point in which you're paying too much for not enough frames. Essentially, you're overpaying for the amount of frames you should be paying for. And so one trick I like to do is to determine the frame per dollar ratio. And how to determine that is you look at a benchmark with the particular graphics card that's being used, and you look at one of your favorite games, and you divide the frames, the average frames you get in that game, by its price value in terms of how much it costs in US dollars, for example, if you live in the US, and that'll determine how many frames you get per dollar, and obviously the higher ratio wins. And like I said, there's a sweet spot in which you should spend your money on for a graphics card, and it's usually around $200 to $250 up to $400. You don't want to be paying so much for like a GTX 1080 because that is pretty much overkill. There's so many graphics cards out there that can play the mainstream games today, such as Rise of the Tomb Raider and Grand Theft Auto 5. You don't need the highest of end graphics cards from NVIDIA or AMD. And speaking of which, when shopping for a graphics card, there's two companies that you can buy your graphics card from, which is the red team known as AMD and the green team known as NVIDIA. Now, I'm going to say this right now, there is no team that you should be rooting for, or there's no particular manufacturer that you should be buying all your graphics cards for. You need to do your research and determine what is in the graphics card that you like about it. For AMD, they have specific benefits that NVIDIA doesn't offer. However, I like to stick with NVIDIA because they offer benefits such as Shadow Play and G-Sync and other sort of benefits that I like in a NVIDIA graphics card. So that's why I usually buy NVIDIA graphics cards. However, don't just shop by brand or by name. Buy the games that you like to play. There's so many people out there that do benchmark tests for specific graphics cards. Take a look at those and see how well they do when paired up against the mainstream games today and the games you like to play. Now, obviously, most mainstream graphics cards, such as the GTX 960 or 980, or even the 770, can even run Minecraft at around 120 FPS, or Payday 2 in around very good graphics, or Call of Duty Black Ops 3. However, for the more intensive games, you want to shop for a little bit more higher end, let's say around the $250 range to the $325 range. Personally, for the purposes of my build, I'm going with an EVGA GTX 970 superclocked because it fits my price range, it fits my budget, and it does a lot that I need to do. I get around 70 frames to 60 frames per second in Grand Theft Auto 5 with almost max settings. I just turned just one thing a little bit down, but other than that, I think it's the grass I'm turning down. But other than that, that's how you should determine what kind of graphics card you want to buy. Take a look at your budgets and just determine from there. Now, next up, we're going to have to talk about compatibility with the graphics card and the other components in the computer. Now, the three components that your graphics card has to make do with are the power supply, the motherboard, and the case. Let's talk about the motherboard first. The motherboard can be compared to as the central nervous system in our body. The central nervous system connects all of our body parts and connects it to the brain, so that way our brain can send signals all over to our body, so that way it can control what body parts to move, how much and when. The same thing for the motherboard. The motherboard links all the hardware in the computer and links it all together, so that way software can control hardware. And obviously, you guessed it, the GPU connects to the motherboard. And how does it do this? It uses what we call peripheral connectivity inputs, I believe, or PCI. And the current PCI slots are called PCI Express. And what they do is they have lanes. And they're specifically named PCI Express X1, X2, X4, X8, and X16. Obviously, X16 means it has 6 lanes, and the amount of lanes means it has more bandwidth, which is the amount of room it has to send more data. It can be compared to as read and write speed for a hard drive. The same thing with the graphics card. If it has more lanes, that means it has a more read and write speed when controlling your games. Now, most graphics cards and all the good graphics cards use X16 slots, and the reason why I don't go to X1, X2, X4, X8 PCI Express slots is because most of the graphics cards made for those haven't been updated since the year 2005. The last GPU that was made was for an X8 slot was used in 2005, and ever since around the 2006 to 2008 era, people have been using PCI Express with 16 lanes. And so usually with X1, X2, X4, or X8 PCI Express lane slots, I wouldn't even give those GPUs the time of day. Most GPUs and all the good GPUs use PCI Express X16 slots. You want to make sure you look at those. Unfortunately, if you are really dirt cheap and dirt broke, X1 can fit into X2, X4, and X8 and X16 slots. X2 can fit into X2, X4, X8, and X16 slots. X4 can fit into X4, X8, and X16 slots, and so on and so forth. You get what I'm saying. But still, most graphics cards and all the good graphics cards use X16 slots. So make sure you don't buy something that takes an X1, X2, X4, X8, or X16, because those aren't backwards compatible. However, graphics cards are forwards compatible, but they're not backwards compatible. So do your research on that. PCI Express slots are also organized by generation. There's PCI Express, PCI Express 2.0, and PCI Express 3.0. You want to make sure that you buy the graphics card that has the matching generation of PCI Express slots. Now, luckily, PCI Express slots can be backwards and forwards compatible, so you can plug in a graphics card that takes an PCI Express 2.0 slot and plug it into a motherboard that has a PCI Express 3.0 slot. And vice versa, you can plug in a GPU that takes a PCI Express 3.0 slot and plug into a motherboard that only has a PCI Express 2.0 slot. But you want to match those PCI Express slots compatibility just to get the most out of your speed. So if you have the matching lane slots and generation, then you should be good to go for compatibility between the GPU and the motherboard. Next, let's move on to the case. Now, graphics cards have to fit into the case because they slide into what we call PCI Express expansion slots. If you look on a website for a particular GPU's manufacturing websites, they'll tell you all the specifications about a graphics card, and they'll tell you its width or how many PCI Express expansion slots it takes up. Most graphics cards take 2, some take 1, rarely some take 3, but most of the mainstream graphics cards such as the GTX 980, GTX 1080, and GTX 770 take 2 PCI Express expansion slots. However, make sure you do your research, because I'm not very knowledgeable about AMD graphics cards, but you can do your research on your own for that. And the next compatibility between the graphics card and the case is that you have to make sure it fits, like it literally physically fits inside the case. Now, most case manufacturers on their website, when you look at specifications for a case, will give a maximum width and height for a PCI Express card, which is either a graphics card, a sound card, or an Ethernet card. It'll give a maximum width and height and length for a graphics card or a PCI Express expansion card. Make sure that the width and length of your graphics card doesn't have any compatibility issues with the inside of your case. Do some research on that and make sure that the graphics card is smaller than the case will allow a PCI Express expansion card for. Now that we got out of the way, let's take care of the last compatibility issue between the graphics card and the power supply. Now, the power supply powers all the components inside the computer, such as the central processing unit, the random access memory, and the motherboard, and the case's fan headers. Also, it powers the graphics card, and it powers all of the components in there, so all the components share a certain amount of wattage from the power supply. So that's why power supplies can support a maximum of 400 watts, 500 watts, 600 watts, all the way up to 1500 watts. Now, 1200 and up is pretty much overkill because most computers usually take up around a 300 load in between to a 500 load at most. Most computers, mine takes around 400 watts, around 406 I believe. You can go onto a website and enter all of the components inside your computer if you know them, and it'll give you an estimate amount of wattage. As you can see, mine takes around in between 300 to 500. I believe it says 406 for my estimated load wattage for all the components I put in, but you put them in yourself if you know your components. If you don't, you can always go onto the graphics processing unit's manufacturing website and it'll tell you how much power it takes. As you can see, my graphics card takes around 150 to 175 watts of power, and it also gives you a minimum power supply rating. It recommends you how much your power supply should be able to supply to your entire computer. In this case, the minimum wattage that your power supply should supply to a GTX 970 is around 500 watts or greater. The rule of thumb I like to use is to buy a power supply that supplies 100 watts greater than the minimum for a graphics card. So as you can tell, I own a 600 watt power supply. Although the computer is not pumping out 600 watts, it supports up to 600 watts just in case of a sudden power surge or a power spike, such as caused by lightning during a storm. Next compatibility issue between the power supply and the graphics card is that the power supply connects to the graphics card via PCI Express power connectors, and usually these come in either 6-pin, 8-pin, or Molex. 6-pin is the most common, 8-pin is more common between higher-end graphics cards such as the GTX 1000 series, and Molex is a terrible connector because it's straight going out the door and going the way of the dodo. If you see a GPU that takes a Molex connector, do not buy it because it is trash. And if your power supply only has Molex connectors, you can use adapters to connect them to 6-pin or 8-pin connectors. However, that's usually a sign that your power supply isn't designed to take on a dedicated graphics card or any other PCI expansion cards. So try to use adapters as least as possible, but if you're on a very tight budget, then make sure you get some adapters. However, if you do have PCI Express 6-pin or 8-pin connectors on board, you're good to go. Some power supplies will provide you with a 6-pin with a separate 2-pin right next to it, so that way you can convert it from a 6-pin to an 8-pin. As you can see in this image here, my power supply does supply a PCI Express 6-pin to an 8-pin adapter. Not adapter, but more of a converter. So if you're lucky enough to have one of these power supplies, you're pretty much good to go for any sort of graphics card. I forgot to mention that if you do not have the sufficient power to supply to all the computer at once, such as if you don't have a power supply that meets the minimum wattage recommendation for a graphics card, you're better off upgrading your power supply first, as you would definitely fry your computer and bottleneck it if you did buy the graphics card first. Make sure you always provide power supplies first, because power supplies are probably the most important component inside a computer. It powers everything. With that all being said, if you checked off everything on the checklist, if you are compatible with the motherboard, the power supply, and the case, then you should be good to go, and we'll go right ahead with installing our new graphics card in our computer. As you can see, this is my rig. I'm using a Corsair 200R compact ATX mid-tower case, and this is a pretty good case. If you are in the market to buying a new computer case that fits an ATX size motherboard, I recommend buying this one. It's served me very well, and I'm sure it'll serve you well too. The first thing you want to do is you want to unscrew the thumb screws from the left side of the computer case. They're called thumb screws because you can unscrew these with your thumb if they're pretty much loose. However, if someone's screwdriver tied your thumb screws, or they're super tight where you can't undo it with your thumb, you may as well use a screwdriver to unscrew them, as that's what this is also designed for as well. Pop off the side panel and leave it on the side so where it won't fall down, get bent, or get scratched. I know most mid-tower cases use a glass panel, and you do not want to screw those. Next, what you want to do is you want to unscrew the thumb screws that connect the GPU to the PCI expansion slots. As you can see, these are the PCI Express expansion slots I was talking about. My GPU takes up 2 of them. Unscrew the thumb screws and take those out, and next you'll want to take out the PCI Express power connectors from the GPU. Once we're done with that, you'll see in the back that there's a little tick or tack that connects the GPU to the motherboard. Some motherboards will have you will make you push the pin back, and some motherboards will have you slide the tick to the right. Mine requires me to slip the tack to the right, so slip the tack to the right if you're in my case, and then you can easily pull out the graphics card. It may take a bit of a wiggle, but it doesn't require too much force. Don't yank it out of there, otherwise you'll damage the graphics card. And as you can see, we've successfully removed our current graphics card. As you can see, this is a GTX 970 superclocked made by EVGA. This one died out on me, so I have to replace it with the same graphics card because it fits me very well, it fits my budget, and it gives me a pretty good FPS per dollar range. I usually score around 60 to 70 FPS on GTA 5, and I score around 80 to 90 FPS on Black Ops 3, and I score around 50 to 60 FPS on Rise of the Tomb Raider, so this graphics card really fits my needs well, as I play those games a lot. To install a graphics card, you'll basically do the same procedure backwards. Insert the graphics card into the PCI Express 3.0 or 2.0 slots, and if you're like me and you just had to slide the tick to the right, make sure you slide it to the left to lock the PCI Express slot inside of the computer. Then you'll want to screw back the thumb screws that connect the GPU to the PCI expansion slots. Once you're done with that, connect the 6-pin or 8-pin PCI Express slots into the GPU, back into the GPU, and then you can put the side panel back on and screw back in your 2 thumb screws connecting the side panel to the computer. And that's it. You pretty much upgraded your graphics card. Now you're ready to join the PC Master Race like the rest of us. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like down below, so I'll make sure that you want me to do more tutorials like this on how to upgrade your graphics card. However, I already covered this in this video, so in the next video I'm going to be I could do all of the components in one video, or I can do separate videos such as how to upgrade your CPU, your RAM, your power supply, your CPU cooler, and all that sort of jazz. So make sure you comment if you want me to do it all in one video, or you want me to do separate videos like I did for this one. I wanted to get this one out of the way because this is probably one people are expecting the most. So anyways, that's it guys. If you like this video at all, please leave a like down below. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure you subscribe for more PC building tutorials. And I'll see you in the next video whenever that may be. So stay foxy guys, and toodles.